Hello there. Welcome back to Whisper Diaries. It's Natalie here, and tonight I'm whispering about something that stirs the deepest chambers of desire. Those mysterious encounters where uncertainty becomes the most potent aphrodisiac, where what remains concealed awakens our most profound longings. You know what I'm talking about. Those moments when a glance holds too long and reveals too much, yet still keeps its most important secrets. The electric uncertainty of not knowing someone's true intentions, even as their presence draws you inexorably closer. The particular alchemy that occurs when someone reveals themselves to you, one careful layer at a time, each revelation more intoxicating than the last. So dim your lights, perhaps pour a glass of something that warms your blood, and let me share some stories about those encounters where mystery and desire create a tension so exquisite it transforms both parties forever. Let's start with a story I'm calling The Cipher, which comes from my dear friend Elise. Like many tales of mysterious attraction, this one begins with words: anonymous, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. Elise owned a small, independent bookstore nestled between a cafe and an antique shop on a quiet street known for its literary character. Her shop specialized in rare editions and forgotten classics, attracting a clientele as eclectic and interesting as her carefully curated collection. After 5 years of ownership, she prided herself on recognizing her regular customers not just by face but by literary taste. The professor who collected first edition poetry, the doctor with a passion for Victorian mysteries, the young writer who browsed but rarely purchased, absorbing the atmosphere more than the merchandise. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when the first note appeared, placed between the essay pages of a returned book from her rental collection, a lesser-known Fitzgerald that had been checked out for 2 weeks. The note was handwritten on heavy cream paper, the kind Elise herself favored for important correspondence. The handwriting was distinctive, confident strokes that managed to appear both disciplined and artistic. The careful curator might find that the spaces between selected volumes often tell more compelling stories than the volumes themselves. Your selection of Fitzgerald adjacent to Woolf speaks volumes about the curator, a deliberate juxtaposition of jazz-age exuberance against modernist introspection. I wonder which more closely mirrors your interior landscape. No signature, no indication of who might have left it. Elise read it twice, then a third time, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The observation was astute. She had indeed deliberately placed those authors in proximity, enjoying the intellectual tension between their worldviews. That someone had not only noticed but had been moved to comment on it intrigued her in a way she hadn't expected. She placed the note in her desk drawer, assuming it was a one-time comment from a thoughtful customer. Yet 3 days later, a second note appeared, this time left on the counter while she was busy with another customer. The same distinctive handwriting, the same quality paper. I noticed you moved Austen away from the Brontes today. A separation of rational affection from passionate abandon, or perhaps just a practical rearrangement of inventory. Either way, the distance between them creates a space where one might contemplate the nature of different loves, those that sustain through understanding versus those that consume through intensity. Which would you choose, I wonder? Elise found herself looking more carefully at her customers that day, wondering which one might be observing her so closely, interpreting her small curatorial decisions with such attention. Was it the silver-haired gentleman who spent hours in the philosophy section, the woman in her 30s who always dressed in impeccably tailored suits and purchased biographies of powerful historical figures? By the third note, left a week later, inside a book she'd been reading during a quiet moment, Elise realized that she was being drawn into a peculiar kind of courtship, intellectual, indirect, and undeniably compelling. Your reading choices reveal a preference for unreliable narrators, those who conceal as much as they reveal. I find myself wondering if you, too, present different faces to different observers. The careful bookseller, the passionate reader, the woman who sometimes gazes out the window with an expression that suggests worlds beyond this small street. I would very much like to know which version is most authentic. The notes continued for nearly a month, always appearing unexpectedly, always containing observations that were simultaneously personal and philosophical, never intrusive or inappropriate, but increasingly specific in their attention to details about her that most people would overlook. The mysterious correspondent noticed when she changed her earrings, when she rearranged displays based on her own shifting moods rather than commercial considerations, when she lingered over certain passages in books she read during quiet moments. Elise found herself dressing more deliberately each morning, making choices with an invisible observer in mind. She began leaving subtle responses, rearranging certain books in ways that answered questions posed in the notes, leaving passages marked in books she displayed prominently, curating small collections that expressed her changing thoughts about the mysterious correspondence. It became a conversation conducted through placement and selection, through the language of literature they both clearly cherished, a dance of minds where the partners remained unidentified, at least on one side. Her friends noticed the change in her, a new awareness in her posture, a subtle glow that hadn't been there before. "You've met someone," her closest friend declared, over coffee one afternoon. "Not exactly," Elise responded, unsure how to explain the strange courtship unfolding through handwritten notes and literary references. "Well, whatever it is, it suits you," her friend observed. "You look like a woman with a delicious secret." She was right. The mystery had awakened something in Elise, a heightened awareness of herself as not just a bookseller, but a woman being seen, truly seen, by someone who observed with unusual perception. The revelation came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when the shop was nearly empty. Elise had been reorganizing the poetry section when she heard the bell above the door. Looking up, she saw a man she recognized as a semi-regular customer, tall with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, always impeccably dressed in a way that suggested quality rather than fashion. She had assisted him perhaps half a dozen times over the past year, primarily with selections of literary fiction and classical philosophy. "Good afternoon," she greeted him as he shook rain from his umbrella. "Can I help you find something specific today?" "I believe you already have," he replied, his voice carrying a warm resonance that matched the handwriting she had come to know so well, though perhaps not in the way either of us initially expected. Elise felt a rush of awareness, these pieces falling into place. He had always been pleasant but reserved during their previous interactions, interested in her recommendations but maintaining a polite distance. Nothing in their brief professional exchanges had suggested the depth of attention revealed in the notes. "It was you," she said softly, not a question but a recognition. "Gabriel Winters." He introduced himself properly, extending his hand. "I apologize for the unusual approach. I've always found that words on paper allow for a kind of honesty that's difficult in immediate conversation. Why not simply speak to me directly?" she asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Her hand remained in his slightly longer than strictly necessary, "because I wanted you to know me through my thoughts before my appearance or position colored your impression," he explained, "and because watching you respond to those thoughts, seeing which ones resonated and which did not, told me more about you than conventional conversation might have." There was something compelling in his directness now that the game of anonymity had ended. Standing before her was not just the author of those perceptive notes, but a man who had been observing her with unusual care, seeing aspects of her that most people overlooked. "And what did you learn?" she asked, finding herself moving slightly closer, drawn by the intensity of his gaze. Observant but warm, analytical yet appreciative. "That you curate your life as carefully as you curate your bookshop," he said. "That you value depth over immediate appeal. That you're guarded in person but remarkably open in your selection and arrangement of books you love. And that you've been participating in this unusual conversation as actively as I have." His observations were accurate enough to create a flutter of vulnerability. Being seen so clearly was both unsettling and exhilarating. "Would you allow me to continue our conversation over dinner?" he asked, this time with the benefit of faces and names to accompany the exchange of thoughts. Elise considered him, this man who had initiated such an unusual courtship of the mind. In another context, the anonymous notes might have seemed intrusive, even concerning, but there had been something in the quality of attention they conveyed that had never felt threatening. Rather, they had acknowledged her complexity in a way few people ever had. "On one condition," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "that you bring another note. One that tells me something about yourself that I wouldn't be able to observe directly." His answering smile suggested he appreciated the challenge. "A fair exchange," he agreed. Tomorrow evening, as he left the shop, Elise felt the pleasant tension of anticipation, not just for the dinner, but for the continuing unfolding of this unusual connection. What had begun as mysterious words on paper had evolved into something with the potential for deeper understanding. The anonymity had created a space where authentic communication could flourish before conventional interactions could limit it. When Gabriel arrived at her shop the following evening to escort her to dinner, he handed her an envelope containing a new note in that now familiar handwriting. "What you cannot observe, that I have spent my life collecting facts but finding few truths, until I began to notice the woman who arranges books as if they are in conversation with each other, and by extension with her. That despite apparent confidence, I am more at ease with written words than spoken ones. That seeing you read the first note I left was the moment I understood that observation without connection is merely surveillance, not understanding, and that I have never before revealed my thoughts so directly to anyone as I have to you through these notes. The revelation was more intimate than anything that had been written before, not about her, but about him, offering vulnerability in exchange for the exposure she had experienced through his observations. Dinner that night extended into hours of conversation, each discovery more intriguing than the last. What began as anonymous notes evolved into a profound connection between two people who had found an unconventional path to seeing and being seen. Sometimes the most revealing conversations begin in mystery, the gradual discovery creating a foundation stronger than more conventional beginnings might allow. Our next story is The Masquerade, which explores how concealing our identities can sometimes reveal our truest selves and desires. My cousin Madeline had always lived her life according to careful plans and expectations. As the youngest partner at her law firm, she had built a reputation for meticulous preparation and unwavering professionalism. Her colleagues respected her sharp mind and relentless work ethic, but few knew the woman behind the impeccable suits and precisely arranged arguments. The annual charity masquerade ball had never been on her social calendar until this year, when a senior partner had placed a ticket on her desk with a note suggesting that even the most dedicated attorneys occasionally require diversions. The implication was clear. Her work was exemplary, but her visible dedication to the firm's social obligations was lacking. Madeline approached the masquerade with the same thoroughness she applied to case preparation. Her gown was elegant, but not ostentatious. Deep emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair, which for once was freed from its usual severe style. The mask she selected was more elaborate than she'd initially intended, a delicate creation of silver filigree and emerald crystals that concealed the upper half of her face while accentuating her eyes. When she caught her reflection before leaving her apartment, she barely recognized herself. Without the familiar structured suits and carefully controlled expression, she appeared almost like a character from another life, one with fewer constraints and expectations. The ballroom of the historic hotel had been transformed for the evening. Crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the space. Elaborate floral arrangements creating intimate corners within the grand room, and the attendees all partially concealed behind masks ranging from simple to theatrical. The effect was both elegant and slightly surreal, as if the normal rules of society had been temporarily suspended. Madeline accepted a glass of champagne and moved through the crowd with practiced poise, acknowledging the partners she recognized, despite their partial disguises. She had just completed an obligatory conversation with the firm's founding partner, when she felt a presence beside her, someone standing just within her peripheral vision. "You're watching everyone as if they're witnesses to be evaluated," a voice observed, deep and resonant with a hint of amusement, looking for inconsistencies between their masked selves and their everyday personas. She turned to find a man she didn't immediately recognize, tall and broad-shouldered in impeccably tailored formal wear, his face partially obscured by a mask of dark blue and silver that complemented his striking eyes. professional habit, she acknowledged, intrigued by his observation. And you? What brings you to the corner of the room rather than the center of the dance floor? I find the margins more revealing than the center, he replied. The performances are more authentic when people believe they're not being observed. There was something familiar about him that she couldn't quite place. Perhaps the cadence of his speech or the way he held himself with relaxed confidence. Yet she was certain they hadn't met before, at least not in any significant way. And what does my performance reveal? She asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. He studied her for a moment before responding, his gaze both appreciative and analytical. That you're more comfortable advocating for others than occupying space for yourself. That beneath your careful observations lies a curiosity about what it might be like to be among those who move through the world less cautiously. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate, penetrating the persona she had carefully constructed. Rather than feeling exposed, however, Madeline found herself intrigued by the possibility of conversation with someone who seemed to see beyond her professional facade. The benefit of masks, she noted, is that they allow us to try on different versions of ourselves without immediate consequences. Is that what you're doing tonight? He asked, trying on a different version of Madeline Chen. The use of her name startled her. You know who I am. Just as you're trying to place me, he confirmed with a slight smile. The masks only conceal so much. As they continued talking, moving to a quieter corner of the ballroom, Madeline found herself speaking with a freedom she rarely allowed herself in professional settings. Perhaps it was the mask, or the atmosphere of the event, or simply the attentive presence of this man who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts rather than her accomplishments. Would you care to dance? He asked during a natural pause in their conversation. Or would that fall outside the parameters of your obligatory appearance tonight? The gentle challenge in his question made her smile. I rarely dance, she admitted, but tonight seems designed for exceptions. On the dance floor, she discovered another surprise. He moved with the same confident grace that characterized his conversation, leading with subtle guidance that made following him feel like the most natural thing in the world. The physical proximity created a different dimension to their interaction. The subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth of his hand at her waist, the way he adapted his steps to complement hers. You mentioned consequences earlier, he said as they moved together through the music. What consequences concern you most about stepping outside your carefully constructed boundaries? The question was surprisingly personal, especially coming from someone she still couldn't fully identify. Yet the partial anonymity made honesty easier than it might have been otherwise. Disappointment, she answered after a moment's consideration, both experiencing it and causing it. Perfection may be unattainable, but excellence is a far safer target than exploration or indulgence. And tonight, he asked, his voice lowering slightly as he drew her incrementally closer. Is tonight an exploration or an indulgence? I haven't decided yet, she replied with uncharacteristic spontaneity. Perhaps you could make a compelling argument for either interpretation. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of genuine surprise followed by appreciation, spoken like a true attorney. But some questions are better answered through experience than argument. As the evening progressed, Madeline found herself staying far longer than her planned appearance required. They danced, they talked, they observed other guests with the shared pleasure of mutual commentary. Throughout it all, she remained conscious of the growing certainty that she knew this man from somewhere, that beneath the mask was a face she would recognize if properly revealed. When he suggested they step onto the terrace for fresh air, she agreed without hesitation. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable, the terrace illuminated by strings of small lights that created pools of gentle illumination among the shadows. "Are you going to tell me how you know me?" she asked finally, her curiosity overcoming the pleasant mystery of their interaction. "We've never formally met," he admitted, "but I've seen you in court. I was observing a trial where you were representing the plaintiff, a case about intellectual property last spring. Your closing argument was masterful. You never once raised your voice, yet you commanded the entire room. The information narrowed the possibilities significantly. You're an attorney as well. An adjacent profession," he clarified. "I work as an expert witness in technical cases, engineering primarily." With that detail, recognition finally clicked into place. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, the name emerging from her memory of case files and witness lists. "Julian Blackwood, you testified in the Mercer case last year. Not mine, but I reviewed the transcripts. Guilty as charged," he acknowledged with a smile that transformed his face even behind the mask. "Though I prefer Julian to Dr. Blackwood in settings like this." The revelation should have shifted their interaction back to professional territory, yet somehow the foundation they had established through masked conversation prevented that retreat. "Why not simply introduce yourself?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Would you have spoken to me with the same openness if I had?" he countered. "Or would professional courtesy have created a different kind of mask, one harder to see through than these?" He gestured to their literal disguises. She considered his question honestly. "Probably not," she admitted. "Professional boundaries are their own kind of protection." "Against what?" he asked, his voice softening as he moved slightly closer. The terrace was empty save for them, the sounds of the ball muted by the glass doors separating them from the main event. "Against complication," she answered, aware of the growing tension between them, not adversarial, but charged with possibility. "Against distractions from what matters, and what matters tonight, Madeline?" he asked, reaching up to trace the edge of her mask with gentle fingers. "Here, where you're both yourself and someone slightly different." The question hung between them, filled with potential interpretations. She could step back, re-establish professional distance, thank him for an interesting conversation, and return to the measured life she had so carefully constructed. Or she could acknowledge the undeniable attraction that had been building throughout the evening, the rare connection that had formed in the space between revelation and concealment. "Tonight," she said, making her decision, "what matters is discovering what exists beyond the boundaries I usually maintain." His smile in response held understanding and anticipation in equal measure. When he leaned closer, his intention clear, She met him halfway, the kiss beginning with the gentle exploration of two people discovering a new landscape together, then deepening into something more urgent as mutual restraint gave way to genuine desire. Later that night, in the quiet of her apartment, Madeline studied Julian's sleeping form with a sense of wonder. Their lovemaking had held the same quality as their conversation, attentive, responsive, finding rhythm and connection through careful observation and genuine interest in the other's pleasure. What had begun as an obligatory appearance at a charity event had evolved into something she had never anticipated, a profound connection with someone who saw her more clearly through a mask than most had seen her through years of professional interaction. As she traced the outline of his profile in the dim light, she reflected on the strange alchemy of the evening, how concealing certain aspects of identity had created space for more essential truths to emerge. Tomorrow would bring questions about how to navigate this unexpected development, how to integrate it into her carefully structured life. But tonight had shown her that sometimes the most valuable discoveries come precisely when we allow ourselves to step beyond our own carefully maintained boundaries. When Julian awoke and reached for her with sleepy affection, Madeline made a decision that surprised her planned-out self. She would allow this unplanned connection to unfold without predetermined expectations. Some masks, she was discovering, were more restrictive than those made of filigree and crystal. Our final story tonight is The Night Train, which explores how the liminal space of a journey can create a sanctuary for unexpected intimacy between strangers. My friend Vivian had booked her overnight train journey from Edinburgh to London with purely practical considerations in mind. After a week of intensive meetings with potential clients, she wanted the gentle rocking motion of the train to lull her into sleep, arriving refreshed for her presentation the following morning. She had reserved a private sleeper compartment, small but adequate, with its own tiny bathroom and a narrow bed that folded down from the wall. The train was scheduled to depart at 11:30 p.m., and Vivian arrived at the station with characteristic punctuality, settling into her compartment with a book she doubted she would read for long before exhaustion claimed her. The gentle motion of the train pulling away from the platform was just beginning to lull her toward sleep when a commotion in the corridor drew her attention. "I do apologize, sir, but there seems to have been a booking error," she heard the attendant saying. "We have a passenger in the system twice, once in compartment 7B and once in 7D, but 7D doesn't exist on this carriage." "There must be some alternative," a man's voice responded, his accent suggesting education but not pretension. "I have an important meeting in London tomorrow morning." Vivian recognized the tone of someone accustomed to solving problems rather than being derailed by them, something she respected from her own approach to professional challenges. Before she could reconsider, she slid open her compartment door. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the attendant and the stranded passenger, a man perhaps in his early 40s, wearing a tailored coat that suggested business travel rather than leisure. "I couldn't help overhearing. I have a private compartment. If it would help solve the immediate problem, I'd be willing to share until another solution can be arranged." The offer surprised her as much as it appeared to surprise the attendant. Vivian was typically protective of her personal space, particularly when traveling, yet something, perhaps the lateness of the hour, or the genuine distress of both attendant and passenger, had prompted an uncharacteristic impulse toward generosity. "That's extremely kind," the man said, studying her with a mixture of gratitude and consideration. "But I wouldn't want to impose. It's a practical solution to an immediate problem," Vivian replied, her pragmatism reasserting itself. "The compartment has facing seats that convert to berths. We're both adults capable of sharing a small space for one night." The attendant, clearly relieved at the potential resolution, quickly agreed to the arrangement and promised to return with extra linens and a complimentary breakfast voucher for both passengers in appreciation of their flexibility. Once the door closed behind the attendant, Vivian found herself in the curious position of having invited a complete stranger into her personal space for the next 8 hours. The compartment, which had seemed adequate for one, now felt decidedly intimate for two. "I'm deeply grateful," the man said, extending his hand. "I should introduce myself." "Perhaps not," Vivian suggested, surprising herself again. "We're sharing this space for one night as strangers on intersecting journeys. Maybe there's something valuable in maintaining that. Just two people in transit, without the complications of names and backgrounds." He considered her suggestion, his expression thoughtful rather than offended. "An interesting proposal," he said finally, anonymity creating a different kind of honesty. "Exactly," she agreed, relieved at his understanding. "No expectations, no performance based on who we're supposed to be." "Very well then," he agreed, settling into the seat opposite her. For tonight, just two travelers sharing a temporary sanctuary. As the train continued its journey through the night, cutting through the darkness of the Scottish countryside, they established practical arrangements for the small space. Who would use the bathroom first, how they would configure the berths for sleeping, small courtesies to maintain comfort in close quarters. With the practicalities settled, they found themselves in conversation that soon diverged from polite small talk into more substantive territory. Without the context of names, professions, or personal histories, they discussed ideas rather than resumes, perspectives on books they had read, places they had visited, observations about human nature and society. "There's something almost confessional about a train at night," he observed at one point, gazing out at the darkness beyond the window, their reflections ghost-like against the glass. "As if the movement through space creates a pocket outside of normal time." "A liminal space," Vivian agreed. "Neither here nor there, suspended between departure and arrival." As the night deepened and the rhythm of the train created its own hypnotic backdrop, their conversation gradually shifted from philosophical abstractions to more personal reflections, not about the external details of their lives, but about the internal landscapes that rarely found voice in everyday interactions. He spoke of a persistent feeling that his life's trajectory, while successful by external measures, had somehow diverged from a more authentic path he couldn't quite articulate. She confessed her growing weariness with being the most responsible person in every room, the one who always anticipated problems before they emerged. "Do you ever wish you could step outside your own life for more than just a train journey?" he asked, his voice lowered in the dimmed light of the compartment. "Create a different version of yourself entirely." "I think that's what I'm doing right now," Vivian admitted, aware of how differently she was behaving from her usual careful self. "There's a freedom in being unknown, in not having to maintain consistency with who I've always been." As the conversation continued, the physical awareness between them grew more pronounced. The accidental brush of knees when the train swayed, the way his gaze sometimes lingered on her face when she was speaking, the increasing comfort with the shared intimacy of their confined space. When the attendant returned to convert their seats into berths, the practical reality of sleeping in such proximity brought the simmering tension between them into sharper focus. The berths were arranged one above the other, close enough that conversation could continue even from separate beds. "Upper or lower?" he asked, the practical question somehow charged with unspoken meaning. "Lower," she decided, the choice feeling significant beyond its surface simplicity. They took turns using the small bathroom to change for sleep. When Vivian emerged in silk pajamas, the one luxury she allowed herself when traveling, she found him already settled on the upper berth, respectfully giving her space to get comfortable. With the lights dimmed to a soft blue glow and the rhythm of the train creating a soothing backdrop, they continued talking in the darkness, their voices more intimate without visual distractions, the conversation gradually moving into territories that felt too vulnerable for daylight or full visibility. "What do you want that you've never told anyone?" he asked, the question floating down from the upper berth. In the protective darkness, Vivian found herself answering with unexpected honesty. To be seen completely, not just the competent, contained person I present to the world, but all the contradictions and complexities beneath, and to be desired not despite those contradictions, but because of them. The silence that followed her confession felt charged rather than awkward. Then she heard movement above her, and suddenly he was standing beside her berth, his figure outlined in the dim blue light. "May I?" he asked simply, gesturing to the edge of her narrow bed. When she nodded, he sat beside her, the small space requiring their bodies to touch along one side. The contact was both casual and electric, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building through their anonymous conversation. "I see you," he said quietly, his hand finding hers in the semi-darkness, not completely, because that would take more time than one night allows. "But I see enough to know that the contradictions are what make you compelling." The kiss, when it came, felt like both a beginning and a culmination, tentative at first, then deepening with mutual certainty. The narrow berth barely accommodated them both, requiring a closeness that might have been uncomfortable with someone else, but instead created a cocoon of shared warmth and discovery. Their lovemaking held the same quality as their conversation, attentive, exploratory, finding connection through genuine curiosity about the other's responses, without names or histories to create expectations. They were free to be present entirely in the moment and with each other. Afterward, lying in the comfortable silence of shared satisfaction, Vivian felt a strange peace about the temporary nature of their connection. By morning, they would arrive in London and go their separate ways. He to his important meeting, she to her presentation. The night would become a memory without continuation. Perfect in its completeness, we should sleep, she murmured, conscious of the hours remaining before arrival. Without exchanging details that would break the spell, he understood without further explanation, pressing a kiss to her temple before returning to his own berth. They drifted to sleep with the rocking of the train, cocooned in the shared liminal space they had created. When morning came and the train approached London, they prepared for departure with the same consideration they had shown throughout the night. As they collected their belongings, the unspoken question of what now hung between them. "I have a proposal," he said finally, as the announcement came that they were approaching the station. "On the platform, we'll go our separate ways without exchange of information. But if you feel, as I do, that there might be something here worth exploring beyond our night sanctuary, meet me at the station cafe exactly 1 week from today at noon." The suggestion held the perfect balance of possibility and freedom, an opportunity without obligation, respecting the unique connection they had formed. "And if one of us doesn't appear," Vivian asked, needing to acknowledge the possibility, "then we'll have had a perfect night," he answered simply, complete in itself, without compromise. When the train pulled into the station, they parted without artificial prolonging of the goodbye. A brief clasp of hands, a final look that acknowledged what had passed between them, and then separation into the flowing crowd of commuters. So for the next week, Vivian found herself contemplating the choice before her: to preserve the perfect memory of their night journey, or to risk transforming it into something more complicated, but potentially more lasting. The decision, when it came, felt both terrifying and inevitable. 1 week later, at precisely noon, she entered the station cafe, not knowing whether she would find an empty table or the beginning of a different kind of journey, one that would require names, histories, and all the complexities they had temporarily set aside. What she discovered there was a story that would unfold beyond the liminal space of their first encounter, built on the foundation of authentic connection that had formed between two strangers willing to see each other in the protective darkness of a night train. As I bring tonight's episode to a close, I hope these stories of mystery, desire, and gradual revelation have awakened your appreciation for the power of the unknown, how uncertainty can create space for our most authentic connections to emerge, the slow unfolding of understanding between two people, the gradual revelation of self, can create an intimacy far more profound than immediate disclosure might allow. Before we part ways tonight, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. I'd love if you'd rate this episode and leave a comment sharing your own experience with mysterious encounters or connections that developed through gradual revelation. And please hit that bell icon to receive notifications whenever a new episode drops. Until our next whispered confession, remember that sometimes the most profound connections arise from what remains temporarily concealed. That perfect balance between revelation and mystery that quickens the pulse and awakens the imagination. In the spaces between knowing and wondering, we often find our most authentic desires, those hidden chambers of the heart that open only when approached with patience and genuine attention. Whether it's anonymous notes that see us more clearly than casual acquaintances, the freedom found behind a filigree mask, or the protected sanctuary of a journey between destinations, there's a particular magic in allowing connection to unfold at its own deliberate pace. Until next time, this is Natalie, reminding you that in a world that demands immediate disclosure, there remains profound power in the art of gradual revelation. Sweet dreams, dear listeners, and may your own mysteries lead you to connections that transform rather than merely entertain.